Welcome Trinidad and Tobago, and of course welcome to all our viewers. I'm here for a one-on-one with the Honorable Minister of Finance and the Economy, Mr. Larry Hawaii. Good day, Minister.
Good day, and good day to all the viewers. Yes.
All right. So what we will be doing today, the Minister will be sharing with us some pertinent and important information on bonds. Now, Minister, I understand that on the 5th of December, just recently, you were accompanied by senior officials, a team to the United States and London to targeted towards highlighting bonds and its function in Trinidad and Tobago. Just tell us a little bit about the bonds and that process.
Yeah, okay. Well, actually, the Trinidad and Tobago was seeking to raise some money on the international markets. We had identified that we wanted to raise about $500 million US, and the focus of the roadshow was to meet with investors and potential persons who were considering investing in the bonds, to tell them about Trinidad and Tobago, speak to them about our fiscal position, speak to them about the prospects of the future, and to encourage them to invest in our bond issue.
Minister, why did the government decide to go to the international markets to float bonds rather than the local market?
Yes, well, we intend to access both the international market as well as the local market. So it's not that the local market will be left out at all. This, however, was a US dollar bond issue. And in doing a US dollar bond issue, it's important to structure it in the right way because it's also a 10-year issue. So while there is some liquidity here in the market as far as US dollars are concerned, by structuring it in a market where there's much more US dollars in the US economy, there'll be greater depth to the market, therefore greater liquidity, more investors potentially, we are able to structure it in a better way. Because there's more liquidity, it means investors are able to buy and sell at short notice. So that there are a number of reasons why it makes sense, as well as the overall structure, the flexibility, and the options that are available as far as the structure of the bond is concerned. These are things that can be done in a better way in a market where there's a lot more liquidity, and in this case in the US market, where also investors can get up-to-the-minute information on the pricing of the bond. So what we thought is that Trinidad investors would have then had an instrument that was more liquid, that had better pricing information on an ongoing basis, and would have been subject to perhaps even better regulatory controls than one would find in Trinidad and Tobago.
When was the last TT sovereign Eurobond?
The last one was in around 2007, and it was simply refinancing an existing bond. It was $150 million US. For us, it sounds like a big amount because you're talking equivalent of $1 billion TT dollars. But for that market, it was a very small issue, and the issue has never really traded much over the past few years, simply because of the size, the relative size being so small, and the fact that investors tend to buy and hold, and therefore price information is very difficult to come by.
Minister, central bank statistics indicate that Trinidad and Tobago commercial banks held US $3.82 billion in foreign currency deposits at July 2013. In that context, will any of the bonds proceeds be used to restructure existing higher rate bonds?
No, the proceeds from this bond issue will actually be used for general budgetary purposes. We did consider the possibility of issuing new bonds to liquidate the old bonds, because the old bonds do carry much higher rates than the current bond that was recently done. And in some cases much significantly higher, and we would have liked to have refinanced it, but those bonds did not have options that allowed us to prepay them early, and as a consequence we decided it did not make sense, because when we considered the price that we'd have to pay to liquidate those bonds, it would have been considerably more than the par value of the bonds, as they say. So therefore our approach was to focus just on raising the monies that we were looking for as part of our general budgetary requirements as had been identified in the budget.
In March 2012, the former Minister of Finance spoke about Trinidad and Tobago floating U.S. bond by September 2012. Why has this bond been delayed? Is this a part of the planning of the government?
Yeah. Well, basically what happened is that when we looked at our overall fiscal position at the time, based at the end of 2012, September 2012, we recognized that there was no immediate need at that time to go into the market to raise new funding, and therefore we thought it was best to defer it until perhaps closer to the timing when we felt we would have needed the funding, and therefore we simply deferred that particular issue, which was originally targeted for about September of last year, to the current timing.
Minister, I know people might want to know, they might ask, why is growth bond internationally when presently there is a high liquidity in the local market?
Yeah, well, there is liquidity on the TT dollar side in the market, and it's our intention to also issue bonds in the local market. We issued a $1.5 billion dollar bond not too long ago, and we did another $1 billion for the Pure program also a few months ago. So some bonds have actually come out, and it's our intention to put new bonds onto the market also during the course of this year. But in addition to that, what I did this year was to increase the borrowing limits for bonds that we use for open market operations. That is to mop up the excess liquidity in the system. So we made some significant some changes that were quite significant to the limits that existed at the time, with a view to give the central bank the capacity to issue bonds that would take up the liquidity. And we got that passed in Parliament a few weeks ago. I expect that the central bank itself will start issuing some of those open market operations bonds in the very near future.
Minister, will by issuing those bonds, would you say that it will further increase our debt ratio?
The bonds that we will be issuing for the open market operations will not increase our debt ratio. The one that we issued recently on the U.S. markets would increase our debt ratio. But overall, the reason why we structured it in the way that we have is to allow our local market to get some instruments, but in a way that does not negatively impact on our debt ratios. So what will happen with the open market operations is the funds will simply be sterilized. So we'll issue it in the market buys it up, and the cash that comes into government is simply deposited in central bank and kept there. So that normally the rating agencies and the multilateral lending agencies such as the IMF and the World Bank will not include those funds in our overall debt ratio.
So will this go into the physical operations for 2014?
The funds that we raised on the international markets will be used for 2014 expenditures, but not the ones that we raise locally using local bonds as part of our open market operations.
What has been the response so far internationally with the increase of these bonds, Minister?
It's been very positive. I have to say that international investors expressed great confidence in the economy. The bond itself was almost 10 times oversubscribed, and I expect that it will continue to trade well in the aftermarket. In fact, what I had to do was to increase the issue by a further 50 million to 550 million to ensure that local investors got part of the issue, because there's such an overwhelming demand by international investors. I should add that at the same time, the Bahamas went to the market at the same time and was trying to raise some funding for themselves, and they actually, based on the fact that we were in the market and the attractiveness with which investors saw us, the Bahamas actually deferred their own bond issue because they felt it would be difficult for them to compete in a market where Trinidad and Tobago was operating at the time, and therefore they withdrew from the market, and we went ahead with our issue, and it was a tremendous success, as I say, almost 10 times oversubscribed.
Let's say a local investor is interested in purchasing or getting a bond. would they be able to apply?
Yeah. In fact, of course, in the primary issue, a number of local investors actually invested in the bond. But even in the aftermarket, a number of investors came in and also bought bonds on days following the closure of the issue. So once we had closed the issue, there are some people who had come in, and those would have bought into the issue at that time. But even after it had closed, there were other people who came in and bought on the secondary market. And, you know, I think it shows again the extent of confidence and trust that persons have in the government and in our local economy. I expect that confidence to continue to grow as the economy continues to improve.
Is government planning in the future to further explore the international markets with regard to bonds?
Not right at the moment. We think we are where we should be as far as the funds that we wanted to raise are concerned. We think that our overall debt levels, we probably would not wish to push them up too much further than above where it is. So we probably want to hold on any new issues for a short while, other than those already in the pipeline, and then, you know, see how things pan out from there, and then we make some kind of decision. Because as the economy grows, of course, the debt to GDP ratio comes down simply by the fact of growth of the local economy. And I think we'd want to monitor how that occurs over the next few months before considering going back into the market again.
Minister, in closing, any advice for investors out there who are looking on right now and are thinking about purchasing bonds, or who want to get, you know, that solid information with regard to bonds in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yeah, well, the thing is that investors can get information from the various brokers. It is an issue that is traded on the international markets and is widely known. So I don't think that there should be any issue with getting information that would allow investors to perhaps take advantage of the issue. And I expect that as we go forward from here, we'll see a lot of local and regional interest in the issue continuing going forward.
Okay. Minister, I want to thank you for speaking with us today and for taking time off from your busy schedule. And it was indeed a pleasure, and I'm sure this information was well reached, received, engaging, and comprehensive. Until next time, I'm Joseph Lopez. Thank you for watching.